The Aegis drifted silently through the Procyon system's outer reaches, its unconventional profile barely visible against the backdrop of distant stars. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the bridge's central platform, her experienced eyes fixed on the tactical display as it tracked multiple anomalies at the system's edge. After 15 years in the United Earth Navy, she had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, every one of them screamed danger. Dr. Reynolds, status report on the shield modifications. She called out to the ship's lead scientist, who hunched over his station with characteristic intensity. Nearly there, Captain, Reynolds replied, his fingers dancing across holographic controls. The biomimetic coding is responding exactly as theorized. We're effectively invisible to standard energy detection methods. The Aegis represented humanity's response to a galaxy that had dismissed them as primitive upstarts. While other species built ever larger energy weapons and more powerful shields, Earth's engineers had taken a different approach. The Aegis's hull incorporated organic compounds that adapted to energy signatures in real time, like a cephalopod changing its skin patterns. Lieutenant Marcus Wong's voice cut through the quiet tension. Contact. Multiple vessels dropping out of FTL. Computer identifies them as hegemony warships. 7. No, 9 ships. Dreadnought class. Chen's jaw tightened. The hegemony had been pushing deeper into human space for months, claiming their superior technology gave them the right to guide younger species. Their ships carried enough firepower to glass a planet, but they had never encountered anything quite like the Aegis. Battle stations, Chen ordered calmly. Initiate silent running protocols. Dr. Reynolds, deploy the quantum snares. Let's show them why they shouldn't judge a species by its apparent technological level. Throughout the ship, crews moved with practiced efficiency. Unlike the automated systems of hegemony vessels, every critical station on the Aegis was crewed by humans. Experience had taught humanity that the unpredictability of organic minds could be their greatest advantage. The hegemony fleet moved into attack formation, their sleek hulls gleaming with barely contained energy. Their leader's transmission cut through space, translated automatically by the ship's eye. Primitive vessel, you have entered restricted space. Your continued resistance to hegemony guidance is futile. Power down your systems and prepare for boarding. We will uplift your species whether you desire it or not. Chen allowed herself a small smile. Mr. Wong, are they in position? Yes, Captain. All enemy vessels have crossed the quantum snare perimeter. Perfect. Chen opened a channel to the hegemony fleet. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the UEA's Aegis. We appreciate your offer of guidance, but humanity prefers to chart its own course. Allow me to demonstrate why. She nodded to Dr. Reynolds, who activated the quantum snares, fields of artificially generated space-time distortion that played havoc with the precise calculations required for energy weapon targeting. The hegemony ship's first salvo of plasma torpedoes went wide, their targeting systems confused by space itself, seeming to twist around their target. Now, Mr. Wong, show them what primitive technology can do. The Aegis's main weapons were not the energy cannons or particle beams favored by most spacefaring races. Instead, it carried banks of mass drivers, refined versions of the simple principle that had served humanity since the invention of the bow and arrow. As the quantum snares disrupted the hegemony's targeting, the Aegis launched its attack. Thousands of smart projectiles accelerated to relativistic speeds, each one carrying a payload of specialized countermeasures. The hegemony's energy shields, optimized to deflect plasma and laser fire, proved surprisingly vulnerable to good old-fashioned kinetic impacts. Direct hits on 3 vessels, Wong reported with professional satisfaction. Their shield harmonics are destabilizing. They've never encountered this kind of attack pattern before. The hegemony fleet's formation began to break down as their commanders struggled to adapt to warfare, unlike anything in their tactical databases. Their return fire became increasingly erratic, missing the Aegis by wider margins as the quantum snares continued to distort their targeting solutions. They're trying to regroup, Chen observed. Dr. Reynolds, Initiate Phase 2. Let's show them another human innovation. The biomimetic coating on the Aegis's hull began to shift, not just adapting to energy signatures, but actively mimicking them. To the hegemony sensors, it suddenly appeared as if they were surrounded by multiple phantom vessels, each one a perfect copy of the Aegis. Chaos erupted in the enemy fleet as ships turned to face threats that weren't there, their sophisticated targeting systems overwhelmed by false positives. In their confusion, they failed to notice the real Aegis moving into position for its killing stroke. All tubes loaded with EMP warheads, Wang announced. Ready on your command. Chen stood straight, her voice clear and confident. Fire. The mass drivers spoke again, but this time their projectiles carried a different payload. As they impacted against the weakened shields of the hegemony vessels, they released precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses. The alien ship's energy-dependent systems began to fail one by one. The hegemony commander's voice crackled over the comm, disbelief evident even through the translation. How? How is this possible? Your technology is centuries behind ours. No, Chen replied. We simply chose a different path. Humanity learned long ago that the most sophisticated solution isn't always the best one. Sometimes the old ways work just fine, especially when your enemy doesn't expect them. As the disabled hegemony ships drifted in space, Chen knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy would soon learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology. It was their ability to think differently, to adapt, and to turn their perceived weaknesses into advantages. Send word to command, she ordered. Tell them the Aegis's first combat test was a success, and add a personal note. Sometimes the best way to advance isn't to follow the same path as everyone else, but to forge your own. The aftermath of the Aegis's victory brought no rest for its crew. As Captain Chen supervised damage control operations, long-range sensors detected a massive surge of FTL signatures. The hegemony was coming in force, and this time they wouldn't underestimate the human vessel. 30-plus ships incoming, Lieutenant Wang reported, his voice tight but controlled. They're deploying in a sphere formation. No blind spots this time. Dr. Reynolds looked up from his console, where damage reports scrolled endlessly. The biomimetic coating is at 60% efficiency. Too many near misses from their last attack. We won't be able to fool them as effectively. Chen nodded, processing the information. The hegemony had adapted faster than expected, but that's what humans did best. Adapt even faster. Engineering. What's our status? Chief Engineer Maria Santos' voice came through clear and determined. Main drive at 85%. Mass drivers operational, but we're down to 30% ammunition capacity. The good news. I've got an idea, Captain. It's crazy, but it might work. At this point, Chief, crazy is exactly what we need. Santos' plan was quintessentially human, taking something designed for one purpose and repurposing it for another. The Aegis's damaged biomimetic coating could be reconfigured to absorb and store energy from enemy weapons fire, like a massive capacitor. It was dangerous, untested, and exactly the kind of improvisation that had kept humanity surviving against all odds. As the hegemony fleet approached, Chen gathered her crew's attention. They think they know what we're capable of now. They'll have countermeasures for everything we did before. So we're going to show them something new. Something they couldn't possibly prepare for because we just invented it. The bridge crew's determination was palpable. This was why human crews still manned critical stations instead of AIs. The ability to understand and implement radical new ideas in the middle of combat. The hegemony fleet opened fire first, a coordinated barrage designed to overwhelm any possible defense. But instead of trying to evade, the Aegis turned to face the assault directly. Diverting all power to the modified coating, Reynolds announced, his fingers flying across controls that had been reprogrammed on the fly. If this works, we'll have one shot at this. Energy weapons struck the Aegis's hull, and for a moment, it seemed like the human ship would be overwhelmed. Then something remarkable happened. The biomimetic coating began to glow, not with damage, but with captured power. Energy absorption at 40% capacity, Santos reported. 60, 80. We're approaching critical levels. The hegemony ships pressed their attack, their commanders likely believing they were finally breaking through the human vessel's defenses. They couldn't have been more wrong. Now, Chen ordered. The Aegis's modified hull released its stored energy in a massive electromagnetic pulse, but not in all directions. The human crew had rigged their ship's magnetic containment systems to focus the release into a narrow beam, creating what was effectively a massive directed EMP cannon. The result was devastating. 3 hegemony ships directly in the beam's path went dark instantly, their sophisticated systems overloaded by their own recycled energy. The blast continued through them, catching 2 more vessels before dispersing. 5 ships disabled, Wang reported, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. The others are falling back, reforming their lines. But the Aegis wasn't finished. While the enemy reeled from this unexpected attack, Chen implemented the second part of their improvised strategy. Launched the maintenance drones. What appeared to be simple repair drones shot out from the Aegis's launch bays. The hegemony ignored them at first. A fatal mistake. These weren't ordinary maintenance units. The human crew had reprogrammed them with attack protocols, turning the small, maneuverable craft into improvised fighters. The drones darted between the larger hegemony vessels, their welding lasers repurposed into cutting tools that sliced through sensor arrays and weapons emplacements. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. Message from the hegemony flagship, Wang announced. They're asking how we keep doing this. Chen allowed herself a small smile. Tell them it's called human ingenuity. When your back's against the wall, you learn to use everything you have in ways nobody expects. The hegemony fleet began to withdraw, their perfect sphere formation broken. They had come expecting to face the same tricks as before, prepared for every countermeasure they could imagine. Instead, they'd encountered something their tactical computers couldn't predict: human creativity under pressure. Damage report, Chen called out, knowing they weren't out of danger yet. Hull integrity holding at 70%, Santos responded. The coating is fried. We won't be able to pull that trick again. But Captain, we've got more ideas. That was humanity's true strength. Not their technology, not their weapons, but their ability to look at what they had and see what it could become. Every defeat was a lesson, every limitation a challenge to overcome. As the hegemony ships disappeared into FTL, Chen knew they would return again, with new tactics and countermeasures. But her crew would be ready, with new innovations and improvisations that no tactical computer could predict. Because that was what humans did best. They adapted, they survived, and they never stopped finding new ways to fight. The hegemony's response to their second defeat came in a form no one on the Aegis had anticipated. Their next wave arrived with a new flagship, a massive vessel that dwarfed its escorts, its hull crackling with computational energy. The hegemony had deployed their most advanced battle computer, the pride of logic, determined to outthink the troublesome humans. Captain Chen watched the tactical display as the enemy fleet approached, noting how differently they moved this time. Gone were the rigid formations of their previous encounters, replaced by fluid, ever-shifting patterns that seemed to anticipate every possible counterattack. They've adapted, Lieutenant Wang observed grimly. Those movement patterns, their battle computer is running millions of simulations per second, plotting out every possible scenario. Dr. Reynolds nodded in agreement. The energy readings from their flagship are off the charts. They've probably linked all their ship's systems to a single tactical AI. In theory, it should give them perfect coordination. In theory, Chen repeated thoughtfully. She had studied enough human history to know that perfect plans rarely survived contact with the enemy. Chief Santos, what's our status? We're as ready as we'll ever be, Captain, Santos replied through the comm. The repair crews worked miracles, But we're still operating at reduced capacity. Whatever we do, we can't take another slugging mash. Chen smiled. Good thing that's not what I had in mind. Dr. Reynolds, tell me about that battle computer. What's its biggest strength? Its predictive capabilities, Reynolds answered immediately. Its processing power allows it to calculate every logical move and countermove, like a chess grandmaster thinking thousands of moves ahead. And its weakness? Reynolds paused. Then understanding dawned in his eyes. It can only predict logical moves. Exactly. Chen straightened in her command chair. Humanity didn't survive and thrive by always being logical. Sometimes our greatest victories came from doing the completely unexpected. Lieutenant Wong, prepare to execute maneuver pattern Charlie Foxtrot. The bridge crew exchanged knowing looks. Charlie Foxtrot was naval slang for a deliberate chaos maneuver, something so seemingly random and dangerous that no rational opponent would expect it. The hegemony fleet struck first, their weapons fire coordinated with mathematical precision. But instead of evading or returning fire, the Aegis did something that must have baffled the enemy's battle computer. It cut all power and began to tumble through space like a dead ship. Their targeting systems are having trouble adjusting, Wong reported. The random rotation is throwing off their predictive algorithms. Better yet, Reynolds added, they're not firing at full strength. The battle computer must think we're already disabled and is conserving ammunition. Chen nodded. The hegemony's perfect logic was working against them. No tactical AI would expect a functioning warship to deliberately make itself appear vulnerable. As the enemy fleet moved closer to investigate, Chen waited for precisely the right moment. Now, she ordered, full power to maneuvering thrusters. Execute the crazy Ivan. The Aegis's thrusters fired in a complex sequence that no sane pilot would attempt, using the ship's existing tumble to add momentum to a maneuver that sent it spiraling between two hegemony vessels. At point-blank range, the human ship launched its remaining kinetic weapons, not at the enemy ships themselves, but at the space between them. The projectiles detonated, creating a cloud of superheated plasma and debris. The hegemony ship's automated systems immediately raised shields to protect against the explosion, momentarily blocking their lines of sight to each other and disrupting their network connection to the battle computer. Their synchronized targeting is destabilizing, Wong announced. The battle computer can't maintain perfect coordination without constant data from all ships. Chen pressed the advantage. Launch our modified sensor drones, full electronic warfare package. The drones, originally designed for stellar observation, had been reprogrammed to broadcast contradictory sensor data on all frequencies. To the hegemony's networked systems, it appeared as if space itself was filled with impossible readings and phantom targets. The Pride of Logic, the enemy flagship housing the battle computer, began to emit erratic energy signatures as it tried to process the conflicting data. Its attempts to predict and counter the Aegis's actions became increasingly confused as human unpredictability defied its logical frameworks. Their fleet coordination is breaking down, Reynolds reported with satisfaction. The battle computer can't establish a coherent tactical response because none of our actions fit any logical pattern it can recognize. The hegemony ships began firing at sensor ghosts, their perfect formation dissolving into chaos. Some vessels, cut off from the battle computer's guidance, reverted to basic protocols that made them even more predictable than before. Message from the Pride of Logic, Wong announced, surprise evident in his voice. They're requesting a cessation of hostilities. The battle computer has determined that it cannot reliably predict or counter our tactics. Chen opened a channel to the enemy flagship. This is Captain Chen. Would your battle computer like to know why it failed? The response came quickly, the alien commander's voice carrying a mix of frustration and curiosity. Our tactical AI is the most advanced in known space. It can predict and counter any logical strategy. That's precisely the problem, Chen replied. Humans learned long ago that pure logic has its limits. Sometimes the best move is one that no rational being would expect. We call it thinking outside the box, and it's something no computer, no matter how advanced, can truly replicate. As the hegemony fleet withdrew once again, Chen knew they had taught them more than just a military lesson. They had demonstrated a fundamental truth about humanity, that their greatest strength lay not in following logical patterns, but in knowing when to break them entirely. "Stand down from battle stations," she ordered, "and someone buy the engineering crew a round of drinks. Their impossible modifications just helped us prove that sometimes the best logic is no logic at all." The Aegis had barely finished emergency repairs when the sensors detected something unprecedented. The hegemony was returning, but this time they had committed their entire regional fleet. Over 50 warships dropped out of FTL, led by 3 massive dreadnoughts that made their previous opponents look like scouts. Captain Chen stood silent on the bridge, watching the tactical display as it struggled to track all the enemy vessels. The crew waited for her response, their tension palpable but their trust unwavering. "They're not taking any chances this time," Lieutenant Wang said quietly. "Those dreadnoughts are their world-breaker-class ships. Each one carries enough firepower to reduce a planet's surface to glass." Dr. Reynolds' voice was grim as he reported from his station. "They've modified their shields. I'm detecting adaptive harmonics designed to counter both our kinetic weapons and electronic warfare. And our hull coating is still at minimal efficiency," Chief Santos added through the comm. "We've barely patched the damage from the last battle." Chen absorbed the information, her mind already working through possibilities. The hegemony had obviously learned from their previous encounters, adapting their technology to counter everything the Aegis had shown them. But they still didn't understand humanity's greatest strength. "They expect us to fight the same way we did before," Chen said, a slight smile playing at her lips. "So we'll show them something completely new." "Chief Santos, remember that theoretical discussion we had about the mass drivers? The one where I said it would be crazy and probably get us all killed?" "Yes, Captain, I remember." "Good. Begin the modifications. Dr. Reynolds, I need you to reconfigure our sensor drones for a new role. And Lieutenant Wang, plot me a course directly through the heart of their fleet." The bridge crew stared at her for a moment before jumping into action. They had learned to trust their captain's seemingly insane plans, having seen them work too many times to doubt now. The hegemony fleet moved into an attack formation that seemed designed to counter every tactic the Aegis had previously employed. Their commander's transmission carried a note of finality. "Human vessel, your resistance has been instructive but futile. Surrender now, or we will be forced to demonstrate the true power of a civilized species." Chen's response was to order the Aegis into a direct acceleration toward the enemy fleet. The hegemony ships held their fire, their commanders likely confused by such an apparently suicidal charge. "All hands, brace for extreme maneuvers," Chen ordered. "Chief Santos, status on those modifications." "Ready, Captain, but I still think this is insane. If the timing is off by even a fraction of a second, then we'll be dead," Chen finished. "But if it works, we'll show them something they'll never forget." Dr. Reynolds, deploy the drones. The Aegis launched its remaining sensor drones, but instead of spreading out to create electronic warfare confusion, they formed up around the ship in a tight formation. The hegemony fleet finally opened fire, their coordinated barrage filling space with enough energy to vaporize a small moon. "Now," Chen ordered. The Aegis's mass drivers fired, but not at the enemy ships. Instead, they launched the remaining kinetic projectiles in a precise pattern around their own hull. At the same moment, the sensor drones activated modified gravity sensors at maximum power. The result defied conventional physics. The interaction between the kinetic projectile's momentum and the drone's gravity fields created a localized distortion in spacetime, a controlled gravitational slingshot that hurled the Aegis forward at impossible speeds. "Gravitational distortion stable," Reynolds shouted over the groaning of the ship's hull. "We're accelerating far beyond their targeting system's ability to track." The Aegis shot through the hegemony formation like a bullet through paper, its passage disrupting their carefully planned formation. But Chen wasn't done yet. "Second phase," she ordered. "Reverse mass drivers." In the engineering bay, Santos and her team had performed what seemed like magic, reversing the ship's mass drivers to act as magnetic brakes. The brutal deceleration would have killed any crew relying on inertial dampeners, but the Aegis's crew had trained for this, strapped into acceleration couches with good old-fashioned mechanical support. The sudden stop placed the Aegis in the perfect firing position behind the hegemony's flagship. Before the enemy fleet could react, Wang executed the final part of Chen's plan. Fire the gravitational pulse. The modified sensor drones, their gravity generators already at maximum power, overloaded in a synchronized burst. The resulting gravitational wave wasn't powerful enough to damage the enemy ships directly, but it did something far more devastating. It created a momentary interference pattern that disrupted the hegemony ship's mass effect fields. Without their mass effect fields, the massive dreadnoughts suddenly had to deal with their true inertia. Their own momentum sent them tumbling out of formation, their crews unable to compensate for physics they hadn't had to deal with in centuries. "Their fleet is in chaos," Wang reported, unable to keep the awe from his voice. "The dreadnoughts are completely out of control, and the smaller ships are scattering to avoid collisions." The hegemony commander's voice came through filled with something humans hadn't heard from them before, respect tinged with fear. How do you keep doing this? Every time we think we understand your capabilities, you change everything." "That's because you keep trying to understand us through the lens of your own civilization," Chen replied. "You advance by building on what came before, always moving in a straight line. Humanity advances by looking at problems from new angles, by combining old ideas in new ways, by being willing to try what everyone else thinks is impossible." She paused, watching as the mighty hegemony fleet struggled to restore order to their formation. "We don't just think outside the box. We forget the box exists entirely." The battle wasn't over. The hegemony still had overwhelming firepower at their disposal. But in that moment, something fundamental had changed. They had finally begun to understand that they weren't facing a technologically inferior species, but one that approached warfare, and perhaps everything else, in a way their civilization had forgotten was possible. In the tense hours following the battle, the Aegis maintained a defensive position as the hegemony fleet struggled to regroup. Captain Chen watched through the main viewport as repair drones swarmed around the massive alien dreadnoughts, trying to restore their mass effect field generators. The sight of such powerful ships rendered helpless by a simple manipulation of physics felt like a perfect metaphor for humanity's approach to warfare. "Message from the hegemony flagship," Lieutenant Wang announced. "Their high commander is requesting permission to come aboard." In person. The bridge crew exchanged surprised looks. The hegemony's leadership caste rarely deigned to meet with lesser species face to face. Their request spoke volumes about how much the recent battles had shaken their worldview. "Permission granted," Chen replied. "Have Dr. Reynolds prepare the atmospheric mix in the diplomatic bay." And Chief Santos, "Already on it, Captain," the engineer responded. "I'm rigging up a real-time translator that doesn't rely on their technology. They need to see we can match them in ways they don't expect." When High Commander Ixel strode onto the Aegis's bridge an hour later, the alien leader's usual aristocratic bearing was tempered with something new: uncertainty. The hegemony officer's crystalline carapace caught the light as they approached Chen, accompanied by two subordinates who couldn't hide their nervous glances at the human crew. "Captain Chen," Ixel began, their translator rendering the words in perfect English. "My civilization has existed for 50,000 of your years. We have conquered challenges your species has not yet imagined. Yet in the span of a few battles, your single ship has forced us to question assumptions we have held for millennia." Chen gestured to the tactical display, where dots representing both fleets hung in space. "Perhaps that's because you've been looking at advancement the wrong way, High Commander. You see technology as a straight line, always moving forward. Humanity learned to look in all directions. Explain, Ixal demanded, but the word held curiosity rather than command. Chen nodded to Dr. Reynolds, who pulled up schematics of the Aegis's various innovations. Every primitive system on this ship represents a different way of thinking about old problems. We don't just ask how to make energy weapons stronger or shields more powerful. We ask if there's a way to avoid needing them altogether. But your methods seem... Ixal struggled for the word. Inefficient, primitive, backwards. Santos suggested from her engineering station. That's because you're judging them by your standards. We've learned there's usually more than one path to any goal. Like your gravitational slingshot maneuver, one of Ixal's subordinates interjected, their professional curiosity overtaking their reserve. You used basic physics principles in a way our tactical computers never predicted because no advanced civilization would consider such risks. Exactly, Chen said. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology. It's our creativity. Our willingness to try the impossible. Our ability to look at a problem and see solutions nobody else would consider. Ixal moved to the viewport, gazing out at their fleet. We came to uplift your species to guide you along the path we thought was correct. Instead, you have reminded us of something our civilization had forgotten. Progress does not always mean moving forward on the same path. Sometimes, Chen agreed, the best way forward is to step off the path entirely and forge your own. The High Commander turned back to face her. The hegemony has always sought to bring order to the galaxy, to guide younger species toward what we saw as proper development. But perhaps we have become too rigid in our thinking, too convinced of our own superiority. Order has its place, Chen acknowledged, but so does chaos. Innovation often comes from embracing uncertainty, from being willing to try what others consider foolish or impossible. Yes, Ixal said slowly, we have watched your species since you first achieved faster-than-light travel. We saw your varied approaches to technology, your seemingly random paths of development, and we dismissed them as signs of primitiveness. Now we understand, this was not weakness, but strength. The alien leaders straightened to their full height. I am authorized to offer terms, not of surrender. Neither side has truly lost here, but of partnership. The hegemony would learn from humanity's creativity. In return, we would share our advanced technologies, not as masters uplifting servants, but as equals exchanging knowledge. Chen smiled. I'll forward your offer to Earth's government, but I suspect they'll be very interested. Humanity has always believed that diversity, of thought, of approach, of solutions, makes us all stronger. As the diplomatic discussions continued, Chen looked around her bridge at her crew. Humans who had faced down an overwhelmingly superior force, not through advanced technology, but through creativity, courage, and the willingness to try the impossible. They had proven that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in following the established path, but in finding new ones. The Aegis had done more than win a series of battles. It had shown the galaxy that true advancement doesn't always mean moving forward. Sometimes it means moving in directions nobody else had thought to explore. In doing so, they had turned potential conquerors into allies, not through superior firepower, but through the uniquely human ability to think differently. Send word to Earth Command, Chen ordered as Ixal and their subordinates prepared to return to their ship. Tell them that Operation Paradigm Shift was a success. The galaxy is finally ready to learn that there's more than one way to reach the stars. The hegemony fleet would soon depart, but they would return, not as conquerors, but as partners eager to learn humanity's most valuable lesson, that the future belongs not to those who can build the biggest ships or the most powerful weapons, but to those who can imagine new possibilities and dare to pursue them.